French President Emmanuel Macron has kicked off his parliamentary election campaign with a press conference outlining his campaign plans. Macron announced a snap election the morning after a major swing to the right in the European elections. Marine Le Pen's far-right anti-immigration party, the National Rally, scored a dramatic victory on Sunday, winning more than double the votes for Macron's alliance. The results prompted him to dissolve Parliament and call for a first round of voting at the end of the month.
This is why, in my view, the answer could not lie in changes of government or coalitions, which were not possible in Parliament, as the last few days have very clearly shown, but in a dissolution, which is the only way to clarify matters. Because we are at a time when our country must rise to a number of challenges and cannot be blocked by the extremes, and because it is an act of confidence in our people, in democracy, in the Republican spirit, in our national common sense. In my view, in this context, returning to the sovereign people is the only Republican decision.
Well, Catherine Fieschi is a political analyst at the European University Institute in Florence, and she gave me her thoughts on Macron's justifications for his decision.
The way Macron justified it today is essentially through two things. One, by saying nearly 50% of people voted for extremes because he really doesn't make much of a difference between the extreme left and the extreme right. And he said at that level of anger, if I hadn't done anything, if I had pretended that it was business as usual, you would have accused me of being completely disconnected. So that was his first justification. And I think his other justification was very much the idea that particularly the extreme right, the Rassemblement National, led by Marine Le Pen, I think needed to be confronted with some of their responsibilities. He presented this very much as an act of trust in the French people, and basically said, you know, we're going to turn back to them and give French people a say. French voters a say.
Yeah, very much an appeal to the people, as you say, just looking at some of the quotes from what was a fairly lengthy press conference.
Always is.
Talking about the dissolution of the National Assembly, a test of truth between those who choose to strengthen their own hand and those who choose to strengthen the hand of France. So really appealing to the French sense of self, I suppose, and what France is all about.
Very, very much appealing to the Republic, to the Republican sentiment that brings French people together despite all sorts of other differences. This was very much about transcending differences and really, you know, finding what unites them in their aspiration, in their hope, in their vision for the country. And what he offered, what he outlined, was very much the idea that neither on the extreme right nor on the extreme left would most French people find their vision of themselves and their vision of their country realized. And therefore, you know, he proposed his own centrist coalition of parties as the only reasonable way forward, but also the only aspirational way forward.
Catherine Fieschi, the political analyst, speaking to me a little earlier.
Let's just go quickly right now to the nuclear submarine. Let's show you something that you don't see. I've never seen ever in 12 years of living here. A Russian nuclear-powered submarine, obviously above water, entering the port of Havana, just 90 miles from the United States. You don't get much more potent symbolism than that. This is the largest convoy of Russian warships that has come here in many years, and certainly some of the most sophisticated weaponry that Vladimir Putin has deployed to Cuba in many, many years. We should point out, Cuban officials say there are no nuclear warheads aboard these ships, that they are coming here for peaceful means. U.S. officials have said they do not pose a direct threat to the United States, but they're keeping a very close eye on them, as you would expect. They were shadowed along the coast of Florida over the last several days as they approached the port of Havana.
As Russia faces more international pressure over its war in Ukraine, Moscow is now making a show of force by carrying out military drills in the Atlantic. Russian defense officials say their warships conducted exercises while en route to Cuba for an official visit. NBC News reporter Ed Augustin is live in Havana for me today. So, Ed, are there any nuclear weapons on board these warships? And what more can you tell us about these specific drills that are being conducted?
Ever since the Cuban government announced that the Russian flotilla would pull into Havana, they've been emphasizing that they will not be armed with any nuclear weapons. That's a long-standing Cuban policy, and also Cuba's a signatory of a nuclear non-proliferation treaty signed back in the 1960s that many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean signed, stating that there can be no nuclear weapons in the territory, particularly in Cuba. That was signed shortly after the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962. In terms of military drills, it's another story. The Russian Ministry of Defense released video of artillery fire that the flotilla had carried out on the Atlantic a few days before arriving, and that was a military drill. They were firing against a simulated air attack, and this morning, just hours before they pulled into Havana Bay, there was another military drill. This time, though, no artillery was fired. It was purely simulated on computers aboard some of the naval vessels.
You know, Ed, it's not lost on any of us that Havana is only a couple hundred miles from South Florida. What kind of message is this sending, especially as Russian President Putin continues to make threats against the U.S. and our NATO allies?
Cuba is so close to the United States that one woman a few years ago even swam from Cuba to Florida, really, really close, 90 miles away. And of course, this is happening in the midst of the war on Ukraine. And of course, that won't be lost on the Biden administration.
The Pentagon also deployed warships and aircraft today to track Russian vessels as they make their way to Cuba.
That's right. Last week, Moscow launched vessels toward the Caribbean for a series of planned military exercises.
However, marinetraffic.com shows one of the ships came within, get this, 30 miles of Key Largo, Florida. The Biden administration maintains that there is no threat to the U.S. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin joins us from the Pentagon. So, David, we hear there's no threat. We know that this has last happened, I believe, in 2019. But the Pentagon's sending forces to the Caribbean. Talk to us about the ships that Russia has in the region and what the U.S. ships are expected to accomplish.
Well, first place, there's no way the U.S. Navy is going to let Russian warships operate in its backyard without keeping very close track of them. Second, this is a chance to gather intelligence on the Russian Navy. These Russian ships, there are 4 ships, a nuclear-powered submarine, a guided missile frigate, an oiler, and a seagoing tug. They have been conducting exercises, drills, as they move through the Atlantic, and the Navy will try to monitor that every chance it gets. Plus, it's a chance to train the U.S. Navy on the difficult job of tracking a Russian submarine. So the Navy has had 2 destroyers plus 2 ships that are equipped with a special kind of sonar that you tow behind you and get down deep where the submarine is operating, plus maritime patrol planes to shadow this Russian flotilla as it comes across the Atlantic. And incidentally, once they got close to Cuba, the Russian ships were also tracked by unmanned sail drones, these little unmanned sailboats affixed with cameras that the Navy is using around the world in place of warships. Now, those Russian ships are in port in Cuba. They're expected to stay there for 5 days, but when they come back out, the Navy will resume shadowing them.
So while the U.S. may pick up some intelligence, David, and these vessels were in international waters, it is unusual for them to be within, 30 miles of Key Largo, Florida. What's the messaging Russia's trying to send?
Well, these ships are here to be seen. This is Vladimir Putin displaying his displeasure with American support for Ukraine. So Cuba announced that these ships were coming last week, and today when they pulled into Havana, they were greeted with a 21-gun salute. But I should also point out that at the same time, Putin is sending this message with 4 ships in the Caribbean. The U.S. is participating in a much larger NATO exercise at the same time in the Baltic Sea, which is right in Putin's backyard.
All right, David Martin, thank you.
Taxes up.
That's what you're voting for if you vote SNP. Taxes up.
People know in Scotland that the SNP has increased taxes on higher earners.
Some teachers, some police, but not the millionaires, not the business owners, ordinary people.
For people who are teachers or police officers, the difference in tax is very limited. But of course, there are other benefits, like the fact that people in Scotland don't pay for university tuition, or that they don't pay for prescriptions, or that they have generally a council tax payment that's about £500, £600 lower than if they were living in England. So there are different considerations to be borne in mind rather than just focusing on the tax issue. But I'm not in any way seeking to downplay the significance of increasing tax for higher earners. Because what that's done is that's allowed us to invest in our public service. The alternative to that, of course, is cuts in public spending.
Isn't the problem, though, for Plaid Cymru? You call yourself the Party of Wales. You're a Party of Wales. I mean, the Reform Party only formed recently, didn't even fight seats at the last election. You're about to celebrate your centenary in Plaid Cymru, and they're ahead of you in the opinion polls.
There's not a single square inch of Wales that isn't represented by a Plaid Cymru member in the Welsh Parliament.
That's because of proportional representation. You only win constituency seats in the west and the north of Wales, not in the south, in the big towns and cities.
And it's not true, of course. We have, and we will again, and we're represented in every single Welsh region, including the south east of Wales, the north east of Wales. Plaid Cymru represents, and our message is relevant to all of Wales, and that's what we have to remember. Of course, a first-past-the-post system makes change very, very difficult. It's a perverse system. Not many countries in the whole world now are left with this kind of first-past-the-post system.